When my son placed the steak on my plate and said, "Mum, eat this one," he thought he was being kind. But I saw his wife's knuckles turn white as she gripped her wine glass. She was not waiting for me to eat. She was waiting for me to die. She had no idea that while she glared at my fork, I had already swapped the poisoned slice onto her plate. My name is Eleanor Ward. I am 68 years old, and tonight I sat in the high-backed velvet booth of Harbour and Hearth, one of the most expensive restaurants in Cleveland. It was supposed to be a celebration. The 45th anniversary of the day I married a man who is now decomposing in a pine box 6 feet underground. My daughter-in-law, Tessa, had insisted on this dinner. She called it a cozy family gathering to honor Jack's memory. But as I looked at her across the white tablecloth, I saw nothing cozy in her eyes. I saw a calculator tallying up days. The table was set for 5, though only 3 of us were breathing. There was me, my son Michael, and Tessa. The 2 empty chairs remained vacant, symbolic seats for Jack and for the ghost of the happy family we pretended to be. The air between Tessa and me was thick enough to choke on. We were 2 women dressed in mourning black for the same man, yet we looked at each other like soldiers in opposing trenches. Michael sat between us, the oblivious peacekeeper, smiling at the wine list, unaware that he was dining in a war zone. When the main course arrived, the atmosphere shifted from tense to lethal. Tessa had ordered for me, insisting on the ribeye steak, medium rare, claiming she knew it was my favorite. It was actually Jack's favorite, but I did not correct her. I watched her as the waiter approached. She did not look at Michael. She did not look at me. Her eyes were locked on the porcelain plates. She tracked the waiter's hands with the intensity of a sniper, watching exactly which plate was placed in front of whom. When the waiter set the steak down before me, I saw her shoulders drop just a fraction of an inch, a microscopic release of tension that only someone hunting for it would notice. Then came the moment that made the hair on my arms stand up. Michael, my sweet, naive boy, reached over with his fork and knife. He cut a succulent slice of beef from the very edge of my steak, the exact spot Tessa's eyes had lingered on a second before. He lifted it, the red juice dripping onto the white china, and placed it gently onto my plate. "Mum, eat this one," he said, his voice full of simple affection. It looks perfect. It was such a normal sentence, a son feeding his mother. But when I looked at Tessa, the mask slipped. She was smiling, but her pupils had constricted into tiny black pinpricks. Her hand was gripping the stem of her wine glass so tightly, I expected the crystal to shatter and slice her palm open. She was rigid, her spine pressed hard against the booth. She was waiting. She was not waiting for me to compliment the seasoning or the texture. She was waiting for a reaction. She was waiting for my throat to close, or my heart to stutter, or my breath to catch. I stared at the meat on my fork. I had seen this look of anticipation before. I had seen it 3 years ago, in my own kitchen, when she handed a mug of coffee to Jack. He drank it, and he never woke up. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. She was not just hoping I would die soon. She was making sure of it, right here, under the crystal chandeliers. I lifted the fork toward my mouth. Tessa leaned forward slightly, before the meat could touch my lips. I coughed. It was a dry, hacking sound that rattled in my chest. I let my hand shake, the tremor of a frail, old woman losing her grip. The fork clattered against the plate. Michael immediately turned to pat my back, distraction written all over his face. In that split second of chaos, while Michael was turned and Tessa flinched at the noise, I moved. I was faster than anyone expected a 68-year-old to be. With a swift flick of my wrist, I swapped the piece of meat Michael had given me with a piece from Tessa's plate. It was a sleight of hand I had practiced in my head 1,000 times since I started suspecting her. When the coughing fit subsided, the meat on my fork was safe. The meat on her plate, however, was the one she had intended for me. I looked up. Tessa was staring at the plate in front of her. The colour had drained from her face, leaving her foundation looking like a layer of chalk. Her eyes were wide, terrified. Her hand shot out and grabbed Michael's wrist, her nails digging into my skin. "Don't!" She started to shout, her voice high and strangled. Then she stopped. She swallowed the rest of the sentence. She realized she could not explain why Michael shouldn't eat a piece of steak from his own mother's plate without admitting what she had done. I watched the panic flutter in her throat. I was right. I was not a paranoid old woman. I was a target who had just dodged a bullet. You might wonder how I knew. You might ask yourself why a woman near the end of her life knows how to execute a magician's trick to avoid a murder attempt at a family dinner. You might wonder why I did not scream for the police right then and there. To understand that, you have to go back. You have to leave the warmth of this restaurant and the smell of roasted garlic. You have to go back to the rain. The clinking of silverware and the hum of polite conversation began to fade from my ears. The warmth of the restaurant evaporated, replaced by a damp, bone-chilling cold. I was no longer sitting in a booth at Harbour and Hearth. I was standing in the mud, smelling the wet earth and the heavy scent of lilies. I was back at the beginning, the day we lowered Jack Ward into the ground. 3 years ago. The wind at the cemetery cut through my wool coat like a dull knife. It was a bleak November afternoon outside of Cleveland, the kind where the sky is the colour of a bruised plum and the rain refuses to fall but hangs heavy in the air. I was 65 years old, trembling not from the cold, but from the sheer impossibility of the wooden box being lowered into the ground. Inside that oak casket lay Jack. Jack was not the kind of man who just stopped. He had spent the first half of his life hauling beef carcasses in a slaughterhouse, building muscles that turned to iron as he aged. Later, when we started our small catering business, he moved industrial ovens and crates of china as if they were made of styrofoam. He eventually transitioned into buying up old warehouses, but the physical strength never left him. He had the heart of a bull. He did not smoke. He had no history of illness. The doctor called it a massive, sudden cardiac arrest. Standing there in the mud, I called it a lie I was too broken to challenge. Tessa stood beside me. She was wearing a black dress that was far too tight for a funeral and stilettos that kept sinking into the wet turf. She had her arm around my shoulders, squeezing at all the right moments, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief. But I felt her body stiffen every time her Apple Watch buzzed against her wrist. While the priest spoke of dust returning to dust, Tessa was checking her messages. After the service, the house filled up with neighbours. It was a diverse crowd, typical of our middle-class block, with people bringing tuna casseroles and apple pies, their voices low and respectful. Tessa moved through the living room like the perfect hostess, accepting condolences and refilling punch bowls. Yet I noticed something strange. She actively avoided looking at the mantel where I kept the framed photos of Jack. Specifically, she turned her back on the picture of him standing proudly in front of the first logistics warehouse we bought 20 years ago. It was as if looking at the source of his wealth made her physically uncomfortable. That was when the memory first pricked me, though I swatted it away like a fly. I remembered a morning 3 weeks before Jack died. Tessa had come over early, insisting on making coffee while I was in the garden. She brought a mug out to Jack, who was checking the oil in his truck. "Drink up, Jack," she had said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You need to be alert for the drive." Later that day, when I was washing the dishes, I found a smear of white powder on the rim of the sink. It looked like crushed aspirin or chalk. I washed it away without a second thought. I was a trusting fool. The medical examiner had been an overworked man who saw a 68-year-old man and assumed natural causes. No autopsy was performed. Tessa had been the loudest voice in that room, nodding sympathetically at the doctor, signing the release forms before I could even put on my reading glasses. "Let us take him home. Mum," she had urged me. "Let him rest." I let her rush me because I was drowning in grief. I did not see that she was rushing to bury the evidence. The real crack in her mask appeared 2 days later at the reading of the will. We sat in the office of our family attorney. Tessa held Michael's hand, looking solemn, expecting to hear that the house and the accounts were passing directly to her husband, and by extension, to her. She did not know about the Ward family trust. She did not know that Jack and I, fearing exactly this kind of scenario after seeing a friend lose everything to a bad marriage, had locked our assets away. The house, the warehouses, the savings. Everything was owned by the trust, managed by me and a law firm. When the attorney explained that Michael was merely a beneficiary and had no direct control over the capital, the room went silent. Tessa froze. She smiled, and she hugged me, saying, "Mum, do not worry. I only need Michael. We do not care about the money." But I saw her eyes. They slid over the thick legal binder on the desk, and the skin around her temples pulled tight. It was the look of a gambler who had bet the house on a sure thing and watched the wheel land on zero. At the time, I told myself she was just being practical. I told myself she was disappointed but not malicious. I could not let myself believe that a human being could murder my husband for a payout and then smile in my face when the check didn't clear. I was wrong. That night, after everyone left, I stood alone in my kitchen. I turned on the faucet and stared at the stainless steel sink. I scrubbed the spot where that white powder had been 3 years ago. I scrubbed until my knuckles were raw and the sponge fell apart in my hands. The powder was long gone, but the stain of it had finally reached my mind. That was the night I stopped grieving and started watching. That was the night the haunting began. Though I did not yet know that the ghost in the house was not Jack, but the woman sleeping next to my son. To the outside world, my daughter-in-law was a saint in Lululemon leggings. Tessa was a part-time yoga instructor who posted daily affirmations about inner peace and gratitude on her Instagram. She was the treasurer of the PTA, the woman who organized the charity bake sales, and the neighbor who always waved with a bright, toothy smile. If you asked anyone on our street, they would tell you Eleanor Ward was lucky to have such a devoted girl looking after her in her twilight years. They saw the casserole dishes she carried. They did not see the arsenic-laced glaze she coated them with. Inside the house, the atmosphere was different. It started with comments that were wrapped in concern but tasted like insults. We would be sitting in the living room, and Tessa would look at my hands, shaking slightly, a normal tremor for my age, and say, "Mum, have you looked into that assisted living facility on Elm Street? Yet, you know, just in case you become too much for us to handle here. It was always said with a smile, but the implication hung in the air like stale smoke. She was not suggesting a retirement community. She was suggesting an exit strategy. Michael, bless his heart, was useless in these moments. He works as a maintenance engineer at the Ford plant, a good man who understands how to fix a broken conveyor belt, but has no idea how to repair the fractured dynamic between his mother and his wife. Whenever I tried to bring up Tessa's sharp tongue, he would sigh and say, "Mum, Tessa is just straight talking. She is stressed. Do not take it personally." So I learned to shut up and watch. I started noticing physical patterns. Every time Tessa made me a cup of coffee to start my day, or brought me a bowl of her homemade minestrone soup because I looked tired, I would end up on the bathroom floor an hour later. The room would spin, and a wave of nausea would hit me so hard I could barely breathe. The doctor dismissed it as vertigo or age-related blood pressure issues. He prescribed more pills. Tessa was always the one who volunteered to pick up my prescriptions. She would come home, sort the pills into my weekly organizer, and explain the dosages to me as if I were a toddler. I took them because I trusted the system. I did not realize the system had been hijacked. The first crack in my denial happened at the supermarket. I was in the cleaning aisle, looking for detergent, when I saw Tessa standing near the pest control section. She was not looking at the fly swatters. She was holding a large canister of industrial-strength rat poison. When I steered my cart toward her, she jumped, nearly dropping the container. "Oh, Mom," she said, recovering her composure instantly. "I have heard scratching in the basement. Those rats are getting bold." I nodded and said nothing, but I knew for a fact that Jack had installed high-end electronic ultrasonic repellents in the basement a year before he died. We had not seen a mouse, let alone a rat, in 5 years. A week later, I came home early from a library book club. The garage door was open, and I heard Tessa's voice. It was low, urgent, and lacked her usual melodic tone. She was pacing by the workbench. "I know the interest is compounding." She hissed into the phone. "I need until the end of the month. If I do not have the cash by then, you know what I have to do. Just back off." I stepped on a dry leaf, and the crunch echoed. Tessa spun around. In a nanosecond, her face transformed. She laughed a bright, fake laugh and said into the phone, "Oh my God, Jessica, you are hilarious. I have to go. Mum just got home." She hung up and smiled at me, but her eyes were cold, dead sharks. She ramped up the pressure to sell the house after that. She brought home glossy brochures for a place called Silver Meadows, talking about how they had 24/7 nursing care and heated pools. She casually mentioned she had already asked a realtor friend to appraise our property, just to see what the market was doing. She asked about the procedure to transfer the deed from the trust to a personal account to facilitate the sale. I felt like I was drowning. So I went to see Pastor Miller at our church. I sat in his office and told him I felt like I was being pushed out of my own life. I told him I felt unsafe. He looked at me with pity, patted my hand, and told me that grief often manifests as paranoia. He said Jack's death was a heavy blow and that Tessa was likely just trying to help me transition to a safer environment. He told me to pray for clarity. I went home and prayed. But God did not send clarity. He sent a piece of trash. Late that night, I was rinsing a glass when I saw something in the garbage bin that Tessa had forgotten to empty. It was a small plastic bottle, the kind you get from a pharmacy. But the label had been aggressively torn off. Only a fragment of a QR code remained. Lying next to it was a pair of disposable latex gloves. Why would my daughter-in-law need surgical gloves to take her daily vitamins? I fished the bottle out and held it under the light. It was empty, but it smelled faintly chemical, sweet and acrid. I went into the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. I saw grey hair, wrinkles, and eyes that were tired of crying. I asked the woman in the glass a question. Are you just a sad, lonely old lady imagining monsters in the dark? Or is it time to accept that the monster is sleeping down the hall, and she is running out of patience that night? I stopped taking the pills Tessa sorted for me, and the next morning, for the first time in months, I did not wake up dizzy. The night I almost died. Snow was piling up against the windows, sealing the house in a suffocating white silence. Tessa came into my bedroom holding a steaming bowl of chicken soup. She called it her special detox recipe, full of herbs to boost my immune system. She sat on the edge of my bed, her eyes fixed on the spoon, watching me with a relentless, maternal intensity. To keep the peace, to stop the nagging. I ate it. It tasted bitter, like metallic sage, but I swallowed every drop while she smiled. 20 minutes later, the room tilted. I stood up to go to the bathroom, but my legs felt like they were made of water. A crushing weight slammed into my chest, squeezing the air out of my lungs. I collapsed onto the cold tiles of the bathroom floor, the world narrowing down to a single, throbbing point of pain. The next thing I remember is a kaleidoscope of red and blue lights flashing against the living room walls. Sirens wailed, cutting through the snowy night. I heard Michael's voice, high and panicked, shouting my name. And I heard Tessa. She was performing for the paramedics, sobbing loudly, clutching the sleeve of an EMT. She has a history of severe heart problems. She wailed, her voice thick with fake tears. She forgets her medication. Please, save her. It was a brilliant performance. If I hadn't been busy dying, I would have applauded. I woke up in a sterile hospital room, the air smelling of antiseptic and old coffee. A doctor was standing over me, frowning at a clipboard. He wasn't speaking to me, but to a nurse. Her blood is unusually thin, he murmured. The coagulation numbers are off the charts. It looks like she has ingested a massive dose of anticoagulant, or something that mimics it perfectly. He turned to me then, asking about my medication. I listed the pills for blood pressure and cholesterol, the ones he had prescribed. He nodded slowly, then asked if I was taking warfarin or any blood thinners. I told him no. When he mentioned the name of a potent rat poison that acts as an anticoagulant, I saw Tessa, who was standing in the corner, stiffen. Her face went blank, a mask of controlled neutrality. When the doctor left, Tessa pounced. She moved to the bedside, her face rearranging itself into an expression of concern. "See, Mum," she said, smoothing my blanket. "He said it is just your age. Your blood pressure is erratic. You need to let me handle your diet and pills from now on. You are getting confused." I looked at her, and for the first time, I felt a physical lump of revulsion in my throat. She was rewriting reality right in front of me, betting on my senility to cover her tracks. That night, a young nurse came in to check my vitals. She lingered for a moment, looking at the door to make sure it was closed. Then she leaned in close, her voice a whisper. "Mom, do not eat anything brought from outside," she said. "Not even from family. The hospital kitchen will handle all your meals. The doctor wants to control everything that goes into your system. Her words hit me like a bucket of ice water. The doctor knew. Or at least, he suspected enough to protect me. I lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling tiles. The pieces finally clicked into place. The white powder on the sink 3 years ago, the rat poison in the supermarket cart, the dizziness after her coffee, the bitter soup. Tessa didn't just want me out of the house. She wanted me dead. And suddenly, the horrifying truth about Jack hit me. He hadn't died of a heart attack. He had been murdered. And I was next. My hands shook, but not from age. I reached for the landline on the bedside table. I dialed a number I hadn't used in years, a number Jack had made me memorize. Only for emergencies, he had said. It was the private line for Ruiz and Latham, the law firm that managed our trust. Dana Ruiz answered on the third ring. Her voice was professional, calm, and utterly devoid of nonsense. I told her everything. I told her about the soup, the doctor's comments, the rat poison, and my suspicions about Jack. I expected her to tell me I was crazy. Instead, there was a heavy silence, followed by a tone of steel. Eleanor, if what you are saying is true, this is not a domestic dispute, she said. This is homicide, and attempted homicide. We are not going to wait for her to try again. We are going to hit back. The next morning, Tessa breezed into the room carrying a bouquet of lilies and a box of blueberry muffins. She looked fresh, rested, and terrifyingly cheerful. Look. Mum, she chirped, setting the muffins on the tray table. I brought your favorites. See, I told you it wasn't serious. You just need to rest. I looked at her. Yesterday, I would have seen a caring daughter-in-law. Today, I saw a predator. I smiled a weak, trembling smile, the kind she expected from a confused old woman. Thank you, dear, I said. But behind my eyes, the Eleanor she thought she knew was gone. The victim had died on the bathroom floor. The woman in the hospital bed was a hunter, and she was just getting started. 2 days after being discharged, I sat in a leather chair in the glass and steel office of Dana Ruiz. The view from the 30th floor overlooked the grey expanse of Lake Erie, but I was focused on the woman across the desk. I told her everything. The soup, the doctor's suspicion, the rat poison in the cart, the white powder from 3 years ago. Dana did not offer me a tissue. She did not look at me with pity. She sat with the stillness of a predator, taking notes on a yellow legal pad, asking sharp questions about dates and times. When I finished, Dana leaned back and tapped her pen against the desk. She reminded me of something that Tessa, in her greed, had completely failed to understand. The house I lived in, the car I drove, and the bank accounts she was so desperate to access were not mine to give. Everything was locked inside the Ward family trust. Most people look at me and see a pensioner living in a dated colonial house. They do not see the portfolio of ugly, boring, windowless warehouses sitting near the highway. Jack and I bought those sheds when they were dirt cheap, back when nobody cared about logistics. Now, with online shopping running the world, those ugly sheds were gold mines. The trust was worth over $15 million. And the beauty of it, I was the trustee. Michael was only a future beneficiary. Tessa. She was a ghost in the paperwork. She did not exist. I closed my eyes and saw Jack standing in our kitchen 40 years ago, slamming his hand on the table. We had just watched our friend Bob lose his entire business in a nasty divorce. Jack had looked at me, his face red, and said, "El, we built this with our sweat. We scraped grease off industrial ovens for this. I will be damned if I let some girl come in, bat her eyelashes at our boy, and walk away with half our life's work. We lock it up. Tight." Jack was right, but the irony was bitter enough to choke on. Tessa thought she was killing me for a 3-bedroom house and a modest life insurance policy. She had no idea she was sitting on top of an empire she could never touch. Dana pressed a button on her intercom, and a man walked in. He looked like he had been carved out of granite and skepticism. This was Cole Harrington, a former insurance fraud investigator who now worked as a private investigator. He had made a career out of catching people who staged accidents for payouts. He shook my hand, his grip firm. "If your daughter-in-law is what I think she is," Cole said, his voice gravelly, "she's not going to stop. People like this are sharks. If they stop swimming, they drown. But we need proof. A hunch does not hold up in court. We laid out the war plan. Cole would start digging into Tessa's financial life. You do not murder your mother-in-law for fun. You do it because you need money. And you need it yesterday." He was going to turn over every rock gambling debts, secret credit cards, loans from bad people. My job was harder. I had to go back to that house and play the victim. Dana told me to be the frail, confused old woman Tessa wanted me to be. The more successful she thought her poisoning was, the sloppier she would get. We went over the logistics. I was to buy a digital recorder, the size of a flash drive, and keep it in my pocket at all times. And the food. That was the most dangerous part. Dana showed me how to sew a Ziploc bag into the lining of my oversized cardigans. I had to pretend to eat her cooking, make a show of chewing, and then spit it into a napkin when she turned her back, sliding the sample into the bag for Cole to test. It felt like a betrayal of my son to hunt his wife like this. Michael loved her. He looked at her with the same adoration Jack used to have for me. But then I remembered the doctor's words about my thin blood. I remembered Jack clutching his chest in the garden, gasping for air while Tessa watched the time. I was not betraying Michael. I was saving him from sleeping next to a viper. The meeting ended with Dana standing by the window. She turned to me, her silhouette sharp against the grey sky. "The anniversary dinner is coming up," she said. "Tessa has been pushing for it. That is her stage. She wants a public setting to mask a private tragedy. We are going to let her think she has won. We will let her set the table and pour the wine. And just when she thinks you have swallowed the bait, we are going to swallow her whole life." The conference room tables were covered in what looked like the debris of a paper hurricane. Cole Harrington did not waste time with pleasantries. He laid out the anatomy of Tessa's life, and it was rotting from the inside out. It turned out my perfect, yoga-loving daughter-in-law did not actually have a credit card in her own name. Every transaction she made was attached to Michael's identity or joint accounts. But through a web of digital wallets and obscure third-party transfers, Cole had found the truth. Tessa was not just spending money, she was hemorrhaging it. For the last 2 years, she had been betting on offshore sportsbooks and playing high-stakes online poker. Cole pointed to a highlighted column on a spreadsheet. "You see these withdrawals, they happen at 11 or midnight, usually on Tuesdays and Thursdays. That is when she supposedly has her late-night hot yoga classes. Unless her yoga studio has an ATM inside a casino, she is lying. The total amount siphoned from my son's future over 24 months was staggering. It was over $120,000. Stupidity is expensive, but greed is ruinous." Then Cole slid a grainy photograph across the polished wood. It was taken from a security camera at a riverboat casino 3 hours from Cleveland. There was Tessa, looking disheveled, arguing with a man who looked like he ate concrete for breakfast. Cole introduced him as Ray. Ray was not a friend. Ray was a loan shark who broke fingers when interest payments were late. Suddenly, the desperation in Tessa's eyes when she looked at my house made sense. She was not trying to upgrade her lifestyle. She was trying to save her kneecaps. Dana then played her card. She had called in a favor with the insurance company Jack had worked at for 40 years. It seems that a year before he died, Jack had been convinced to increase his life insurance policy significantly. The primary beneficiary was me, but the secondary, in the event of my death or incapacitation, was Tessa. She had planted the seed a long time ago. Then came the hard part. Cole suggested we look at the medical examiner's report for Jack again. It was thin, barely a page. He looked me in the eye and asked for permission to exhume Jack's body. The word hung in the air like a guillotine blade. It felt like a desecration. But then I thought about Tessa's fake tears at the funeral, and my resolve hardened into steel. I signed the papers. Dig him up, I said. While we waited for the labs to process Jack's remains, the results came back on the soup and coffee I had been smuggling out in Ziploc bags. Cole read the toxicology report with a grim satisfaction. The samples contained high levels of a superwarfarin, a potent rodenticide. It was not enough to kill me instantly, which would look suspicious. It was a cumulative dose, designed to build up until a simple bruise caused massive internal bleeding, or a stroke took me out naturally. 2 nights later, Cole called me. I stood in my dark kitchen, the phone pressed to my ear. The forensic pathologist had found it. The same chemical was present in Jack's hair and bone marrow. It had been administered over months. His heart attack was not a failure of anatomy, it was a failure of trust. He had been poisoned by the coffee he drank every morning before work. I hung up and gripped the back of Jack's chair. I laughed. A dry, rattling sound that died in the empty room. You were right, Jack. The trust did not just protect the money. It gave me the means to drag you back from the grave and tell the world you did not just die. You were murdered. Dana moved fast. She handed the evidence regarding Jack to a detective she trusted at the precinct, opening a homicide investigation. But she withheld the information about my current poisoning. That was the bait. We needed Tessa to feel safe enough to strike one last time. We met for the final strategy session. Dana stood before a whiteboard covered in photos, bank statements, and toxicology reports. She drew a thick red line connecting the gambling debts to Jack's insurance, then to the trust she could not touch, then to Jack's death, and finally to my near miss. We have the motive, Dana said, tapping the picture of the loan shark. We have the method, she said, pointing to the toxicology report. We have the history. We are only missing one thing. We need a clean capture of the act itself. We need her to hand you the poison. Cole looked at me. The anniversary dinner is the stage. She is desperate. Ray is breathing down her neck. She will try to finish it there. I nodded. Let her try. I said, I will be hungry. I became an actress in my own home. It was the role of a lifetime, playing the part of a senile, crumbling old woman while my mind was as sharp as a razor. I started small. I would intentionally drop a glass of water in the living room and stare at the puddle with blank confusion. I would ask Tessa what day it was 3 times in a single hour. I would pretend to look for my glasses while they were perched on my nose. Every stumble and every confused mumble was designed to feed Tessa's confidence. I needed her to believe that I was sliding down a steep slope, picking up speed toward the end. Tessa fed on my weakness like a vulture. She stopped being subtle about the nursing home. She started leaving glossy brochures on the coffee table, open to pages showing smiling seniors playing bridge. One afternoon, she sat next to me and asked if I would prefer a room with a view of the lake or the garden at Silver Meadows. I put on my best worried face and asked her if we could afford such a luxury. I told her I was scared we did not have enough money. She patted my hand and told me not to worry about the finances, that she and Michael would handle the transition. Her eyes were shining, not with kindness, but with the calculation of an accountant looking at a balanced ledger. The breakthrough came on a Tuesday night. Tessa had been drinking red wine since 5 in the afternoon. I was in the hallway, clutching the digital recorder in my pocket, when I heard her on the phone in the sunroom. She was speaking loudly, her inhibitions dissolved by the alcohol. "Just give me a few more weeks." She slurred. "Everything is going to be mine. The house, the old lady's money, everything. Ray will have to shut up then. He will get his cash." I pressed the stop button on the recorder, my heart hammering against my ribs. We had her voice. We had the name Ray. We had the intent. The next day, while Tessa was out at her yoga class, Cole came in and installed a tiny camera under the kitchen cabinets, angled directly at the counter where Tessa prepared my drinks. It was a terrifying necessity. To catch her, I had to give her the opportunity to kill me. I had to sit in the living room and ask for tea, then wait while she was alone in the kitchen, knowing that every second she was out of sight, she could be tapping a vial of powder into my mug. It took every ounce of willpower I had to bring the cup to my lips, pretend to sip, and then pour it into the plastic bag hidden inside my cardigan when she looked away. Then came the invitation. Tessa walked into the living room, looking radiant and falsely affectionate. She suggested we go to Harbour and Hearth for the 45th anniversary of my marriage to Jack. She said it would be a beautiful way to honour him, to let go of the past and start a new chapter. I knew exactly what she meant by a new chapter. It was a chapter where I was a memory, and she was the owner of the Ward Family Trust. I agreed with a trembling smile, thanking her for being so thoughtful. I called Dana immediately. She moved pieces on the board like a general. She arranged for 2 undercover officers to pose as a couple at the table next to ours. They would have equipment to secure evidence, to seize plates and glasses the moment the trap was sprung. For the next 2 days, I practiced. I sat in my bedroom with 2 empty plates, rehearsing the motion, a cough, a switch of the fork, a slide of the plate. It had to be fluid. It had to be invisible. I remembered watching Jack in his workshop years ago, teaching Michael how to use a handsaw. "Do not let the saw jump," he had said. "Smooth strokes. Do not let anyone see the blade shake before you cut." I applied that to my dinner knife. I practiced until my hands stopped shaking. Michael was starting to fracture. I saw him watching Tessa when she snapped at me for dropping a spoon. I saw him looking at the pills that sometimes rolled under the cabinet, the ones I pretended to drop. He was remembering the doctor's words about the anticoagulant. He was a good man, my son, but he was paralyzed by the horror of what he was seeing. He did not want to believe his wife was a monster. So he closed his eyes. I had to force them open. The night before the dinner, I went into the closet where I still kept Jack's old flannel jacket. It still smelled faintly of sawdust and old spice. I buried my face in the fabric and whispered to the empty room. "Tomorrow I am going to have dinner with the person who killed you, Jack. But I promise you, the person leaving that restaurant in handcuffs will not be me." Down the hall. Tessa was in front of her mirror. I walked past her open door and saw her. She was holding up a black dress against her body, practicing a sad, sympathetic smile. She was checking her phone, likely deleting another threatening text from Ray about the debt. She looked at her reflection and saw a winner. She saw a woman who was one dinner away from $15 million. She had no idea she was looking at a rat walking into a trap set by the very mouse she thought she had already eaten. Harbour and hearth smelled of truffle oil, expensive cologne, and old money. It was the kind of place where the lighting was dim enough to hide secrets, but bright enough to make diamonds sparkle. We walked in, a grim procession of three. Michael offered me his arm, his muscles tense under his suit jacket, while Tessa walked ahead of us, her heels clicking a sharp, authoritative rhythm on the parquet floor. As we were led to our booth, I glanced at the table immediately to our left. A middle-aged couple sat there, studying the wine list. The man adjusted his glasses and gave me a nod so imperceptible that if I had blinked, I would have missed it. My backup had arrived. Tessa took charge immediately, radiating the energy of a director arranging a stage. She ordered a bottle of expensive Cabernet, telling the sommelier it was the vintage Jack had always loved. It was a lie. Jack had been a beer man who drank Merlot only on holidays to please me, and he hated Cabernet. She then ordered the ribeye for all of us, medium rare, just how Mom likes it. She told the waiter with a sweet smile. I remained silent, folding my hands in my lap. Jack liked his steak medium well. For 45 years, she had never cared enough to notice. And tonight, her ignorance was my advantage. When the waiter turned away, I let my right hand tremble against the white tablecloth. I looked at Tessa with watery, pathetic eyes. "Tessa, dear, would you mind helping me when the food comes?" I asked, my voice thin. My arthritis is flaring up terribly tonight, and my eyes are so tired. I do not think I can manage the knife. A flash of triumph crossed her face. She reached out and patted my hand. "Of course, Mom. I will take care of you." She was thrilled. I was handing her the weapon, and she was more than happy to take it. The steaks arrived, sizzling on hot porcelain plates. Tessa made a show of inspecting them. She shifted the plates around, sliding one toward Michael, keeping one for herself, and placing the third directly in front of me. At the next table, the man I knew as Cole had his menu propped up, the hidden lens capturing every microsecond of her shuffling. I watched her hands with the intensity of a hawk. She lingered over my plate. She picked up her knife and made a tiny adjustment to a slice on the outer edge, drizzling a drop of peppercorn sauce over it, dragging the tip of the knife through the meat. It was a target. She was marking the kill zone. She raised her glass, the ruby liquid catching the chandelier light. "To family," she said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "To forgiveness. And to letting go of the old house so we can all live comfortably. To new chapters." It was not a toast. It was a victory lap before the race was even finished. Michael, eager to please and desperate to break the underlying tension, smiled. He reached over with his fork. His utensil went straight to the piece Tessa had just touched, the one she had prepared for me. He sliced it clean. "Mom, eat this one," he said, lifting the fork and placing the meat onto my plate. "It looks perfect." The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Tessa watched the meat land on my china with dilated pupils. She was rigid, her breath held in her chest. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my hands were suddenly steady. "Oops," I said, letting my linen napkin slip off my lap onto the floor. As I bent down to retrieve it, creating a momentary wall of confusion, my other hand moved with the speed of a card shark. I slid my plate back, pulled the edge of her plate forward, and in one fluid motion, I flipped the piece of meat Michael had just served me onto her pile. It happened in the blink of an eye. When I sat up, clutching the napkin, the geography of the table had changed. Tessa stared at the plate in front of her. She saw the sauce pattern. She saw the specific cut. The blood drained from her face so fast she looked like a wax figure. Her eyes widened in genuine horror. Her hand shot out, grabbing my wrist as I lifted my fork, her nails digging into my skin. "Wait," she gasped, her voice shrill and panicked. "Do not eat that. Let me have that piece. It is too rare for you. Mum, please." I froze. I slowly lowered my fork and looked her dead in the eye. The confused, frail old woman vanished, replaced by the matriarch who had built a business from nothing. "Why, Tessa?" I asked, my voice soft but cutting through the noise of the restaurant. "What is so special about this specific piece of steak?" The silence that followed was absolute. At the next table, the clinking of silverware stopped. The couple put down their forks. The trap had snapped shut. Tessa tried to salvage the scene. She forced a smile that looked more like a rictus of pain than an expression of joy. She cut a fresh slice of beef from the center of her steak, a safe piece, and pushed her plate toward me. "Here, Mom," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Eat this one. It is softer." I did not pick up my fork. I stared at the piece of meat sitting on the edge of her plate, the one with the extra drop of peppercorn sauce, the one she had intended for my grave. "That is strange," I said, pitching my voice so the table next to us could hear. "I only trust what I cut with my own hands. I am old, Tessa, but I am not easy to trick." Michael looked between us, confusion clouding his face. "Mom, what is going on? Why are you acting like this?" Tessa snapped her head toward him. "She is having an episode. Michael, it is the new medication. I told the doctor it was making her paranoid, but he refused to listen." She had just hammered the final nail into her own coffin. She admitted she was privately managing my doctor. I placed my fork down on the table with a deliberate clatter. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the phone. I set it on the white tablecloth, right between the candle and the centerpiece. I pressed play. Tessa's voice, slurred and ugly with drink, cut through the sophisticated hum of the restaurant. "Just a few more weeks. Everything is going to be mine. The house. The money. Ray will have to shut up." Tessa gasped. Her hand shot across the table to snatch the phone, but in her panic, she was clumsy. Her arm hit the wine glass. The Cabernet exploded across the table, soaking the tablecloth and splashing red liquid all over the steak on my plate. It looked like blood. "Oh, God," she cried. The man at the next table stood up abruptly. It was Cole. "Ma'am, you just spilled wine on my shoes," he said, stepping into the small gap between our tables. I did not look at him. I looked straight at Tessa. 3 years ago. Did you use that same tone with someone else?" I asked. "Did you speak like that before Jack died of a sudden heart attack?" Michael froze. He looked at me, his eyes wide. Dad died of a stroke. No, I said. He was murdered. The restaurant manager hurried over, a napkin in hand, looking distressed. I am so sorry, Madame. Let me clear this mess. We will bring you a fresh plate immediately. He reached for my plate, the one soaked in wine and evidence. No. Tessa shrieked. It was too loud, too desperate. Heads turned at the nearby tables. We do not need a fresh plate. We are leaving right now. The manager recoiled. Cole stepped in. He flashed a badge in his palm, low and discreet. He whispered 3 words to the manager. The manager's eyes widened, and he nodded. He reached down and took my plate. Then he took Tessa's plate. I will just take these to the kitchen, the manager said, his voice tight. Tessa watched the plates disappear through the swinging doors. She knew they were not going to the dishwasher. They were going to the forensics team waiting in the back. She started to hyperventilate. What is happening? Michael whispered, his voice cracking. I leaned forward. I know about the gambling debts. Tessa. I know about the offshore betting. I know about the loan shark named Ray who is threatening to break your legs. I know you bullied Jack into increasing his life insurance policy. Stop it, Tessa hissed. Michael. She is crazy. She is senile. Get her out of here. I also know about the anticoagulant found in Jack's bone marrow, I said, my voice steady as a judge's gavel. And I know about the rat poison in the soup you fed me. And I know exactly what is on that piece of meat you were too terrified to put in your own mouth. Cole leaned down. A man dressed as a waiter had just whispered in his ear. Cole looked at me and gave a single, grim nod. The test is positive, Cole said, loud enough for Michael to hear. It is the same substance as the soup. A lethal dose. Cole raised his hand toward the front entrance. 2 figures in plain clothes stepped out from the shadows near the coat check. Tessa looked at the door, then at her husband, then at me. She realized the cameras had been rolling since the appetizers. The dinner was over, and she was the main course. The 2 officers did not burst in with guns drawn. They walked up to our table with the quiet, terrifying efficiency of men who had done this 1,000 times. One of them, a man with graying hair and a badge on his belt, looked down at Tessa. Ma'am, he said, his voice low but carrying a weight that silenced the booth. Please stand up. We need to have a conversation outside. Tessa tried to play the victim one last time. She turned to Michael, tears instantly filling her eyes, her lower lip trembling. Baby, look at this. Your mother called the police to humiliate me on our anniversary. Tell them to leave. Michael opened his mouth to defend her, but Cole slammed a folded document onto the table. It was a search warrant. He read Tessa's full legal name. Then he listed the charges. Suspicion of first-degree homicide regarding Jack Ward. Attempted homicide of Eleanor Ward. Attempted poisoning of food items at the current location. Michael stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. No, that is impossible. Tessa, tell them they are crazy. But Tessa could not speak. Her eyes were glued to the document Cole was holding. Attached to the warrant was a photocopy of a toxicology report. At the top was Jack's name. In the center, stamped in red ink, were the words, toxicology positive. She realized then that we had dug him up. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking grey and wasted. Her legs gave out, and she slumped back into the booth. Dana Ruiz appeared at the entrance of the dining room. She walked over to us, looking every inch the high-powered attorney she was. She introduced herself to Michael, not as a friend, but as the prosecutor of his wife's lies. She laid it out for him, sentence by sentence, each one a hammer blow: the gambling debts, the offshore accounts, the life insurance policy on Jack, the secret recordings, the rat poison. Tessa snapped. She jumped up, cornered and vicious. "She is lying," she screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. "She is jealous because I am young, and she is old and useless. She planted that stuff. The poison on the meat was her medicine. She dropped it there herself." One of the officers held up a small plastic bag containing the sample strip from the kitchen test. He read the result aloud to the silent room. "The substance on the steak is a concentrated anticoagulant, consistent with commercial rodenticide. It is lethal in high doses." The diners at the surrounding tables gasped. The air in the restaurant felt sucked out. Michael looked at the officer, then at me, and finally at the woman he had married. I saw the moment his heart broke. He connected the dots: the soup, the dizziness, Jack's sudden death, the way Tessa had rushed the funeral. He looked at her, his face a mask of agony. "What did you do to Dad?" he whispered. Tessa went silent. She looked around the room, realizing there was no exit. The officer pulled out a pair of handcuffs. They clicked shut around her wrists with a sound that seemed to echo off the walls. As they pulled her toward the door, Tessa began to scream. It was not a scream of innocence. It was a scream of fury. "You are not innocent either. Eleanor," she yelled, struggling against the officer's grip. "You sat on that trust fund. You have $15 million, and you let us struggle. If I had known about the money, I would not have had to do this." There it was, the confession. She admitted that her greed was the motive, and that she would have killed us both for a slice of the fortune she felt entitled to. I sat, perfectly still. My hands were folded on the tablecloth, which was still stained with the wine she had spilled. I did not look away. I did not tell her I told you so. I just watched her, letting her see that there was no fear left in my eyes. I was not the prey. I was the one who closed the cage door. The restaurant doors closed behind the officers and Tessa. The wail of a siren started up in the distance, fading into the night. Michael collapsed back into his chair, burying his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I reached out and placed my hand on his shoulder. I was not there to comfort the woman who tried to kill me. I was there to keep my son from falling apart. As I sat there, listening to the murmurs of the shocked patrons, a final thought settled in my mind. At the age of 68, I learned the most important lesson of my life. Never trust a person who looks at you like a meal. And if they dig a grave for you, make sure you are the one holding the shovel when they fall in. The anniversary dinner was over. We did not have dessert, but justice was served, and that was sweet enough for me. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on what you would have done in my shoes. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to the Grandma's Family Diary channel, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this video get recommended to more people.